thank you so much for being here. Now, standing together today as superintendents or school leaders are Amy Acurio, Superintendent, Greater Johnstown School District. Amy. Dr. Joseph Roy, Superintendent, Bethlehem School District. Stephen Rodriguez, Superintendent, Pottstown School District. And with Pottstown is also School Board Member Joe Amato. Thomas Parker, Superintendent, Allentown School District. Dr. Khalid Mumin, Superintendent, Reading School District. Dr. Knight-Burney, Superintendent, Harrisburg School District. Stephen Butch, Superintendent, Southeast Delco School District. Stephen is also joined by his board president, Teresa Harris Johnson, and school board member Ed McBride. So thank you all for being here as well. And Dr. Andrea Berry, incoming superintendent, school district of the city of York. And Travis Waters, Steelton Hashspire School District. Thank you all for being here. We also have representatives from the Coatesville Area School District. Urban school districts are responsible in the Commonwealth for educating 1 of every 7 children in Pennsylvania's public schools. That means 1 out of every 7 future workers, business owner, leader, entrepreneur who will graduate from Pennsylvania's public schools in one of our classrooms today will be one of those leaders tomorrow. PA's economic future is directly tied to the quality of education we provide and the quality of education that Harrisburg is willing to invest in. While we appreciate the funding for the Commonwealth currently provides to our school districts, we're here to say it's not sufficient. Pennsylvania's students and families need and deserve much more. Urban districts have specific challenges, including historic underfunding, older buildings, responsibility to fund a growing charter sector. And because of those responsibilities, we are tasked to provide our young people with a quality education. As PA Urban School District Superintendents, we have joined together to advocate for more, for the right of every public school student to attend a school that is free of hazards that could jeopardize their safety, health, and well-being, to attend a high-quality school, district or charter, and to attend a school that is fairly funded to meet the unique educational needs of our students. We're here today united in our ask that the General Assembly take action this legislative session to support students we all have a responsibility to serve. To talk more specifically about the urgent facility improvements needed in our schools, I introduce Amy Acurio, incoming superintendent of the Greater Johnstown School District. Amy?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. What an honor and a privilege to have the opportunity to speak to you here today as I stand beside my fellow urban superintendents to tell you a little bit about the unique needs that each of our school districts face and the challenges that we face as urban educators who are passionate to bring the same educational platform to our students as our partners in rural and suburban education. We are asking currently that you recognize that there is a vital and urgent need for our urban school districts to receive a dedicated and reliable funding source for facility improvements. Our children are learning 21st century skills. We're bringing opportunities like coding and computer science and robotics to our students so that they are competitive with neighboring school district children. But we are providing these services often in school buildings that are over 75 years old and some that are 100 years old. It's very hard to run enough power cords into a computer lab to make sure that students have access to run a computer so that they can be as competitive as their friends and neighbors in other school districts. Many of our school districts have these outdated electrical systems. They have old pipes, they have worn roofs, lead paint, and some even have asbestos. We're doing everything that we can as superintendents of school districts to improve our facility by stretching those dollars further and further. However, it hasn't been enough. We cannot ask our local residents to handle renovations. We cannot force a local tax increase in our communities, which might not be covered due to Act 1 restrictions and annual increases. We need to accelerate these repairs because every year a repair goes unaddressed. It just becomes a repair that is much more difficult to address in future years. These enhancements are needed for our schools, and our students and their families deserve these opportunities. Educational opportunities should not be mandated based on the zip code in which you are educating your students. We need to dramatically reduce the risk and exposure of hazards in our schools by creating safe learning environments for our students. Our lawmakers, please act now to ensure that all of our Pennsylvania children in urban, rural, suburban school districts are learning in healthy environments. We are asking you to revisit PlanCon. Restoring funding for PlanCon to support school renovations, repairs, and new construction is long overdue. Please make PlanCon a priority so that we have the opportunity to bring these facilities to the level they need to be so our students have access. We would like you to create a dedicated, reliable, and a long-term source of funding to address immediate hazards for our school students. Unfortunate issues like lead, mold, and asbestos. They have absolutely no place in our school environments. They have absolutely no place in our students' educational environment. We recognize that PlanCon is not being introduced in the 1920 governor's budget, and we ask why. We ask you to please revisit PlanCon as an opportunity for all of us to be able to increase our facilities for our students. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you today. I'm extremely appreciative as I come to you, as we all do, as champions of our communities and voices for our children and our students and families that sometimes don't have a voice and are not heard. We have a lot more to tell you, and so now I would like to introduce Dr. Joseph Roy, the superintendent of the Bethlehem Area School District, where he is here to tell you and talk about much needed reform for charter education across our Commonwealth. Dr. Roy?
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. I know it's a surprise that we're talking about charter reform today. I would like to recognize Representative Jeannie McNeil, who stepped up represents portions of Bethlehem Area School District and the Lehigh Valley. Thank you for joining us as well. So 3 areas of charter schools I want to hit. 1, oversight and accountability. 2, funding reform, particularly related to cyber funding. And 3, special education funding reform as it relates to charter schools. We need the legislature to act to strengthen, not weaken, district oversight of charter schools. Often districts' decisions to move against charters that are underperforming or have other difficulties in their functioning, and we run into obstacles at the Charter Appeals Board. We need legislation that will strengthen state law, strengthen the district's ability to hold charters accountable and to the same high standards that districts are held, and also give districts the freedom and the flexibility to close charters that are underperforming in their districts. On funding reform, and I think we're representing urban superintendents today, but this really applies to districts across the state, really even more, as much to rural districts as to urban, and that is cyber charters. Pennsylvania taxpayers are paying too much for underperforming cyber charter schools. 13 of the Commonwealth's 14 cyber charter schools are on the list of lowest performing schools. Cybers have few of the regular costs that districts have in running their operation, but receive the same per student funding. School districts, many, now have cyber academies of their own and run them at much lower cost. For example, in Bethlehem, our cyber academy, full-time cyber academy available to students, costs us about $5,000 per student. Students go to a cyber charter school, we pay $11,000 per student for a regular education student and $23,000 a student for a special education student. So there's a waste in funding and use of taxpayer dollars in the funding of cyber charters. We're asking the General Assembly to provide fiscal relief to our local taxpayers who bear the burden by reforming the cyber charter funding. And finally, special education funding. The Special Education Funding Commission a few years ago put in place a rational model to ensure that students with special needs receive the education they deserve, and school districts are allocated state funding based on the actual costs they incur. We know that depending on the special needs of the student, some students' needs are met at a lower cost, and some students have very high needs at a significant cost to districts. The Special Education Funding Commission addressed that and reimburses districts, allocates funds based on the actual cost to educate the students. It's been successful now for 5 years. Unfortunately, that same special education funding formula doesn't apply to charter schools. So now it's time to close that loophole. It's alarming that the fact that the law does not require the funds that we send, for example, that $23,000 in tuition that we send for a single student to a charter school, a single student with an IEP, doesn't require the charters to use that money for special education purposes. We did an analysis of all the charters that we send money to in the Bethlehem Area School District. And based on the data reported by the charters themselves to the state, to PDE through their AFRs, their annual financial reports, the average per special education student cost for the charter schools was around $8,000. We pay tuition of $23,000. They're making a profit off of each special education student. So it's really important, and we urge the legislature to apply the Special Education Commission's funding formula to charter schools as well. That will save districts and therefore taxpayers millions of dollars across the Commonwealth. We ask the General Assembly to hold charters to the same standards and apply the same need-based funding to all charter schools. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next superintendent, Stephen Rodriguez, the superintendent of the Pottstown School District, to talk about fair funding. Stephen. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to just take a second to recognize Representative Isaacson, who has just joined us. Did I get that right? Isaacson, thank you so much. And all the representatives, including my own Representative Cerisi, who, as soon as he was elected, came out swinging for education reform. And we so appreciate his support. And I am so thankful to be with urban educators who recognize the need that even though we are inundated with the different tasks in our own school districts, took time to come here in the Capitol building to make sure that people know who we are representing and how important reform is. We are representing 52% of all students who attend underfunded school districts. And as you heard before, 1 in 7 of those students attend urban schools. Currently, Pennsylvania ranks 47th in our union for per pupil funding. How can we hope to compete with other states like New York, New Jersey, California, or even Indiana when they invest in their future workforce at a much higher rate than we do? What's more, how can we as a state compete in a global workforce if we don't properly invest in the hundreds of thousands of students in our urban schools to help us compete in what we know will be the future economy? Our state chips in about 1/3 of the total cost of education, with our local taxpayers having to foot the bill for everything else. The education funding formula put in place 4 years ago was a great step forward, but not if it takes 30 years to enact, not if it's only $1 out of $10 goes toward it, and certainly not if we know that the funding formula needs more money and we refuse to fund it. We'd like to thank Governor Wolf for his proposed $166 million in new funding formula money, but now we are asking the General Assembly to support it. We are further asking for equitable support in all the ways you've heard here today. We ask for equitable support of our urban students and our urban centers, be they cities, be they towns, or they be little boroughs like the one that I come from, Pottstown. On behalf of all the district leaders represented here, thank you for your support.
I want to thank all my colleagues who are here, who spoke this morning. I want to thank all the representatives who also standing with us. I want to thank the school board members who are here as well. That concludes our press event. We now can take a few questions, and my colleagues and I will try our best to respond.
Today, I'm joined by my colleagues from across the state, superintendents of urban school districts, who are here to appeal to our legislators around PlanCon and around tighter cyber charter school legislation. PlanCon does give us the reimbursement that is required to do the kind of facility updates on the building that's needed. One of the things that we have to realize is we have not had any kind of tax hike in about 5 to 6 years. So what we want to have happen is to be able to, because of our structural deficit, is to be able to fill that with the needed taxes to help us at least support a portion of our budget that gives us our general fund. I am not for receivership. I would have to understand more of what the state would be asking for around receivership, but what I have observed so far in the other districts that have been taken over, that it has not been as profitable for the students around education, so I'm very concerned. I think it's always important to have community input, and when you have elected officials from the community, they're able to better understand the needs of the community and able to have a hand in it. Also, when you talk about stakeholder accountability, how can we get our community involved? We have students, we have parents, we have taxpayers, and they need to have a voice in this. So to take that away, to me, it takes away part of our democratic process. We always face that struggle of what happens when the taxes are raised, because not only are we looking at a school district that has a structural deficit, we're also looking at a city that's competing for those funds as well. So it is hard to ask those who live within the school district and the city to do this. So that's why we're here today, to ask for that equitable funding that we are so needing. Many people don't realize that $38 million is what our share of the equitable funding would require, and that would be enough for our budget to help us fund our general education. So yes, if our taxpayers can also call out to our legislators and ask for that support, then we wouldn't have to raise the taxes. And I live in the city, so I do understand the impact. Enrollment is not down. We look at our elementary grades and we see that our enrollment is up. In fact, we collaborate with our capital area pre-K program, and we know that we always have a waiting list for our pre-K program. We look at not only that, but the students that come in and out of our district. So for the last few years, we have had a steady enrollment, and it has increased. I just think it's important for all of our communities, our stakeholders, to become educated about the real problems within our school systems. And also, don't just come out to criticize, but to be able to be a willing hand to offer support, whether it's providing coaching to students, or just coming to offer helping with the garden, helping to do lunch duty, whatever it may be, but that they're educated about the real issues that are happening in our school districts today. I don't know of any school district that doesn't have issues. I think sometimes being in Harrisburg, it puts a spotlight on us more than any others, but all the districts across the state are facing very similar problems. When we look at the retention of teachers and those going into education, it's no different in Harrisburg than it is for neighboring districts or districts in the western or eastern part of the state. So what I say is come and be involved and really get the real truth and the information before you draw the conclusions, because everything that's printed in the paper is not always the full story.